Hello everyone, my name is Anshul and today with me I have Aditya again. And today Aditya we'll be chatting about AI and AI and India broadly. That's the theme for today's discussion. So Aditya has put in some quite a bit of time in thinking about role of AI, specifically in context of India, and he had worked on a report also. So I'm very curious to discuss some of the insights, and he has a framework how to think about AI and AI specifically challenges for India, the opportunities where we can actually use, where does AI fit into India specifically from the lens of tech policy somewhat, because both of us, we have been together in a course on technology policy and public policy. So let's get started. All right, Aditya, over to you.
Well, Anshul, thanks for having me here. So, Anshul and I will be chatting a bit about India's broadly India's strategy with respect to AI. And when we start thinking about AI, I mean, there are so many sort of the space is so large. As Anshul said, it's useful to think about a framework to sort of understand this space, and then based on this framework, we can think about India's, let's say, strengths or comparative advantages, and areas where where India needs to do a little bit more work, or we need to depend on um, other countries. So there are several ways to think about frameworks. One useful way is to think about the factors of production of a AI model. So when you think of an AI model, what are the inputs to the model? One, of course, is data. So that is the corpus on which your actual model is trained. The second is algorithms. And here there are two parts. One is your actual model architecture. And the second is the training procedures which are used to train the whatever architecture or model architecture you have on the data. So you have two things. I mean, both of them are code. And the third thing is compute. So when you train these models, you require a significant amount of computing infrastructure, basically high-end GPUs, as well as networking or the network interconnects between these GPUs to exchange data. So these broadly are the factors of production of a AI model. That's data, algorithms, and compute. Now, once we have all these three things, okay, you have a model, but this model finally goes into a system. Okay, and it is this AI system, which is possibly, let's say, a software application, or maybe even just an app on your phone. And so to these three inputs, we also add, what would be useful to add is your final applications. So the overall lens to look at AI would be data, algorithms, compute, and applications. Okay. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I think the way I understand is when you say factors of production, the first three things, compute, algorithm, and data, they are factors of production, but application is probably may not be categorized under factors of production. It's more like final usage of the AI. What problems are you going to solve with the AI, right?
Right. So yeah, so the two parts to it. I mean, one is like, okay, what are the inputs or the factors of production? But the AI models are not used in isolation. These models are going to be finally used in some application. And so it's important to when you think about in terms of strategy or in terms of or in terms of the outlook, how these models are going to be used. And so the fourth concept or the fourth target would be applications.
Right, right. And I think from India's perspective, all four are important. right? But for the purpose of this episode, I think we could start with the data, and we'll see if
Right,
we can, deep dive into this one factor data, and then we can maybe in future
right,
episodes we could talk about the other factors.
right. So yeah, I mean, for any country, all these four factors are important, and depending upon the country's resources, some factors would be more important than the other. And in some cases, let's say let's take a country like the US. I mean, it would have strengths in all the four factors, and so it would be able to utilize all four factors to whatever, to gain whatever, or to realize whatever strategic goals it has. India might not be in such a enviable position, but still, I mean, if you look closely at these factors or these elements, we would gain some intuition into how India could use them or improve its position and for achieving its strategic goals.
Correct.
And as you said, I mean, like a useful place. I mean, since data is the input to these models, to the base element on which these models are trained, data would be a good place to start.
Right. Right. So when we talk about using data, so of course, India, this is one of the place where India's strength also comes into certain extent, but because when we talk about data, the population scale systems that we have already deployed, things like the DPI, which we discussed in our last episode, in our last discussion with you. So DPI could be one source of huge set of data generation, and India being also a big country in terms of population, the variety of data, not just in terms of languages, but also in terms of context, different states, within states, there are different. So I think one of the interesting thing was I came across this idea called, homogeneous regions in India, the division of India based on homogeneous regions. So right now we are divided into states, and then states are further divided into districts. But CMIE has come out with this interesting categorization of India by dividing into homogeneous regions, and there are around 100 homogeneous regions, because their definition was that there are things which are to certain in 3, 4 different categories. Those things are homogeneous in all these regions. So, but even that itself is quite big. I mean, US is a large country and they have 52 states, but India has 100, more than 100 homogeneous regions. So the sheer amount of data that we have, uh, of course, that data will be beneficial in terms of application of the AI, but also that data is a gold mine for the world over, not just the developed countries, but also the other countries who are on the path, or who are in the path of developmental states, right? So they will benefit a lot from the data.
Right. So, I mean, like it is true that yeah, India has a lot of I mean, just the government in just its functioning generates a lot of or accumulates a lot of data. And this data is important because, I mean, finally, when we go back to the application side of things, the AI models or the AI systems are supposed to serve a specific demographic. So it would be, I mean, it is important that the models themselves are trained on this data. And so we come to the one of the a sort of fundamental problem. The current frontier models, let's say from OpenAI or Anthropic, or even Google or Mistral, they are trained on, let's say, English, mostly English sources.
Right.
But as you said, there are more than 100 different homogeneous regions, and several of them would have their own languages or even just dialects, right? So one important issue is that India create its own curated data sets, which could be used as inputs to these models. Okay. One thing, but when one is thinking about creating these data sets, there are also issues of privacy and bias that need to be thought of. This is increasingly becoming important because, again, when you go to the application side of things, when these AI models are incorporated into systems which have a customer facing, when let's say people are using this, there's a customers are using this, it should be, if the original data on which these systems have been trained are biased towards one demographic, or then it'll be a problem the sort of outputs these systems use.
Right.
There is much less work. I mean, in the US, there's much more work done on this thing, and India, in fact, because we have so little actual data sets. There's much less work, but more research needs to happen.
Yeah. There are 22 official languages, but as far as we know, there are thousands of dialects. And I think in our last time when we were catching up, we discussed this thing that in India, even these 22 languages have been been imposed on the Indian population, because let's say you talk about a language, a formal language like Hindi, we could claim that Hindi is spoken by maybe 300, 400 million people in India. But that's actually not true, because if you go to any different state, let's say you go to UP or Bihar itself, there are different dialects there. And even Hindi for them is, if you go to rural areas, Hindi for them is a foreign language. I mean, they find it extremely hard to interact with the formal system when the forms and the language of communication and the language of official conduct and administrative work is Hindi. It's very difficult for people. So even the diversity in India in terms of languages, it's actually much more than what we think. When we say 22 different languages, no, that's actually not. It's like thousands of different languages people speak. That's where what you pointed out, that, we need a very, very contextual models in India. And not just languages, even another cultural and demographic context, right? Some time back, I figured this out, that in India, for example, a state like Kerala, they have a mortality rate of 7 per 1,000 childbirths, which is almost the same as US. US has 6 per 1,000. So that's in state of Kerala. And in other states like Chhattisgarh, MP, Assam, these states have child mortality in the order of 45. Which is almost the same as what's there in countries like Sudan and Yemen, who are war-torn countries, civil unrest. And so you can imagine the kind of contrast that we have in India. So cookie cutter, so a model coming from the West, right? Let's say if we pre-trained models which are coming, of course, they will be like a cookie cutter one side solution, which won't work in India, right? So we need a lot of context. We would need to use all this data and fine tune those models, and then maybe those models are useful for us.
Right.
And this was the point I think we discussed last time also, that whether this will be a crucial fact that we take a model, let's say an open source model, which is available, let's say Llama, and we fine tune it on Indian data, as compared to actually training a model from scratch using Indian data. So these two models, of course, training a model from scratch, it's a long shot, because when we come to the part of algo and compute, probably we'll see that it's still a far stretch for India to be able to manage that. But at least to begin with, fine-tuning existing open source models will help us target a lot of low-hanging fruits.
So in terms, when we talk about fine-tuning, yes, as you said, that's a very useful way to start, because like models like Llama, especially the largest version of the model, the 405 billion parameter one, is almost 85-90%, is a frontier model. 85-90% as good as GPT-4. And so training this on Indian data sets would be as good as getting a frontier model. But then we need to also see, I mean, that the government is doing some work on creating these data sets. There is the Harshini project,
Yes,
which is actually curating data sets in Indian languages. This is across government ministries. And this is, I mean, this is a very useful and important. I mean, of course, this is again, I mean, by itself, it is not yet part of a sort of mission-driven uh, use case where, like, okay, this is going to be used for um, AI model training. That is not there as yet, but this is a useful um, corpus which could finally be used to train these models. And
right,
as you said, once we, I mean, like it's, I mean, each state, I mean, in fact, like as you said, not just every state, and that there are divisions within the state. The demographics within a state are so different, especially even some of the bigger states like UP, which has a population more than several countries in Europe. So having these district level, city level uh, data sets is important for training these models.
right, right. In fact, what I think few days back I was just going through my Twitter feed, and a sense I could get from the latest news on AI was that a lot of these models, I mean, all these, AI giants who are just publishing one, they are coming out with their models every few days, right? And specifically the fast, small models which they are coming out, it seems that they are becoming better and better. And I think those small models will probably be more relevant when it comes to fine tuning a model on a very contextual data. And then that another advantage which I could sense with those small models is that you could run those small models on consumer hardware, right? So you don't really need a big inference GPU, that kind of expensive server to run it. You could probably in some time you would have those small models running on your laptops, and that will be a big breakthrough, specifically for I think India, because then you could just take small models, train them, and then give it to public servants who are going into rural areas with a laptop, and that will and even deploying those models uh,
Mm-hmm.
on consumer grade hardware in so
Mm-hmm.
that would be very cheap. And the breakthrough, which of course this again goes back to support the point that for Indian context, this time the AI, this AI technology can actually bring a big difference in India, because this is the first time that uh, at a population scale, people would be able to interact with computers. With
Mm-hmm.
so far, I mean, in India, India still has a large IT force, but still at the same time, a large part of Indian populace is still disconnected. I mean, their interaction with technology is still limited to maybe YouTube and WhatsApp, right? Uh, but to be able to solve problems, fill up a simple form using AI
Mm-hmm.
voice, uh, that is going to probably be a big game changer.
Right. And so I think this ties in with your point that okay, we could take these open weight language models like Llama 3B because they already have the sort of language reasoning already built in. And then, as you said, you just fine tune it on India specific data sets, on Indian languages and India specific data sets. And we have a model which is tuned to the, let's say, the specific Indian demographic, which could later be used in applications on apps to serve or for Indian consumers. And it is this language reasoning abilities. And going back to the fact where I mean, going back to your statement where you said that this is the first time that perhaps rural India is actually interacting with the computer. It's they do interact. I mean, like after Jio has come in, like almost everybody has a smartphone, but it's mostly as they're mostly data consumption devices.
Right.
Okay. People don't actually do any sort of computing on them. And with these, I mean, again, like smaller models running on this consumer grade hardware, such as smartphones, trained for on Indian data sets. Since the language reasoning is there, people could just talk to the model or type in like natural language queries and get their responses.
Right.
They don't have to be software engineers or anything to get whatever context dependent response.
Right.
And so this is one thing. Another point which the government is trying to do is set up India as the AI use case capital of the world. This is similar to what we have done with digital public infrastructure. I mean, DPI has been rolled out to, I mean, like 99% of the Indians, and it's something that works at scale. This India stack, which is running behind, or which is the backend for DPI, and the government is trying to sort of act as a leader for the global south. This sort of digital inclusion, it's trying to sort of showcase it, which countries in the global south could just use it and serve their population or serve their countries. So in a similar way, India is trying, I mean, like the government is trying to make India as a use case capital. And if India has to become a use case capital of the world, it must be able to have this sort of backend infrastructure where we have curated data sets for various specific applications. We have the sort of pipeline where we're able to take, for now, open weight models, okay, near frontier open weight models, train it on these data sets, and make it available in small form factor consumer grade hardware, and showcases that this is possible, that we don't need massive computing cloud facilities to use these models.
Right. And when we talk about data, one is, of course, data in context of fine-tuning these models, but also I have seen this trend, especially in Indian startups, that they are adopting, or at least they are adopting this idea of open data, right? So there is this company called Namayatri. They are connected to ONDC, so they have a platform for ride sharing, ride app. So auto and taxis available on Namayatri. And on their dashboard, on their website, they have made the trips data available, right? So how many trips autos are doing, how many trips city-wise, the collection which is happening, how many people are, as in how much money is being transacted on their platform. So they are making this open. Similarly, Zomato came up few years during the COVID. I think they came up with this. They released their weather data. So they were using the weather data to optimize their delivery partners' time and predict how when there is going to be rain, so they might have a delay. So for all those things, they were collecting the data from weather stations all over India. So they made that available openly. And then I looked for in India, Google also makes their buildings data available as an open data. So all this, I think, I don't know how whether these three pieces of data, how useful they will be, but I think as more and we talked about the role of government in making the state making their population scale DPI data available for AI. But even I see more and more the role of these startups making their data available open, which will again feed into this ecosystem of India's data, and then fine-tuning this model, which is another exciting thing which is happening in the space.
Yeah. Like related, I mean, I was recently looking at the Kochi Metro, okay, and they too make the data available.
Yes, yes.
So the not just government entities, like let's say through the Bhashni project, the various private entities which are also, or semi-private entities which are making their data available.
Yeah. On a lighter note, I just today on Twitter read about startup who accidentally exposed all their APIs without auth. I think I don't know if I shared with you, but you must have heard of it, right?
I didn't quite follow this. So it's some startup that exposed the APIs so that anybody could query their internal data.
Did not put a auth. They did not even, they forget to put auth in front of their API. So somebody, and it was like you scan a QR code and then you place an order in a restaurant for dine-in, and then your order would be placed. And of course, a curious hacker figured out that their API had no authentication. So he played around placing order in the same restaurant. People sitting on his table next to him, and then he pulled out the data for the amount of sales happening across different restaurants, which are the popular dishes, which are being most popular dishes across different restaurants and all that. And that is interesting. So just a light. I mean, I'm just saying that that's another accidentally they are making the data open.
Yeah, which is an sort of interesting segue to another point that we need to think about in terms of which is user privacy,
Right,
right? So, I mean, one is, I mean, India has a digital data protection law, but again, privacy enforcement is not as robust as, let's say, companies as countries such as the US. So while we have, I mean, while the government is sort of hoovering up or vacuuming up this endless amount of data, care should be taken that this is also it should not anonymized,
right,
right? So that uh, private, I mean, like, let's say person-specific data is not, or PII,
right,
personally identifiable information should not be part of these data sets.
right,
That's something that needs to be taken care of.
right, right. True, true. Which I think which brings us to the idea of the risks associated with AI and the bias that I think you briefly alluded to during when we started talking today. Would you like to double click on that part? I mean, what when we talk about bias in the data, I think one of the examples you quoted last time was about in US prison, there was something related to that, right? Could you talk
Right.
about?
So unfortunately, there's less, I mean, research done on bias in not just AI, but machine learning systems in India. But in the US, this has been, I mean, they've much before, let's say, the Gen AI was introduced or generative AI was introduced. Machine learning systems were a part of a lot of their consumer consumer systems there. So this specific uh, piece of work or research that I was talking about was where judges would use, let's say, machine learning systems to sort of give them some sort of inputs to decide on how long to give, let's say, some if somebody's convicted, how long to give them, how long, because they have some leeway as to the length of the sentencing, how long to give that period based on the let's say the convicted person's profile. The idea being that okay, certain people might require a lot of longer sentencing because of their incidence of recidivism. That is, that one when they came out, if the sentencing period was short, they would come out and like commit similar or even perhaps the same crime. But research found out that this that race became a part of this. And so it turned out that African Americans were getting longer sentences for the same sort of compared to white Americans. So this was, I mean, traced to basically the bias in the data set. And so care has to be taken when sort of handling such sensitive information that it is tested for bias. Of course, it's easy to say that data sets have to be fair, but okay, just issues of fairness are complicated because you could always make a data set fair according to some specific dimension that you want. But then it'll become, let's say, unfair or unfair, or you won't get the output that you want, even though it's actually fair according to the dimension that you have, right? For example, like let's say college admissions, you may decide that okay, if you want fairness, you have to see that both there are an equal amount or almost equal amount of men and women, right? But then you could easily get this sort of equality. But then you might have some sort of a skewness in the, let's say, the academic or test scores. Okay. So you have to clearly, sort of deeply think when you're thinking of bias and fairness, how you want to go about it. And more research has to be done in the Indian context because in the Indian context, race is not an issue, but probably caste is an issue. So how you go about this, like sensitive sort of demographic questions is important.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, in India, gender, the male female ratio in a lot of North Indian states is quite skewed. That could itself become a big source of bias. I was reading this book by it's called Numbers on it's a nice title. I'm forgetting the title. Whole Numbers and Half Truths. Yeah, that's the name of the title of the book. So there, the author Rukmani, as she spoke about how if you go by statistics, okay, the crime, so NCRB data, National Crime Reports Bureau, it says that number of crimes per whatever thousand, what is number? It's actually Kerala is has higher crime rate than UP, according to the number. Now that's very counterintuitive. I mean, that's not true. We all know that, right? And the reason is because in UP, most crimes don't get reported, right?
Reported.
If you go
Okay.
to a police station, they would simply refuse to take your FIR. And that just reflects in the NCRP data. And then if you take that data, you of course have a bad data. So that's another source of bias, right? So this is, I think, one of the big challenges. So the opportunity is that India is a source of data, but then there the kind of the flavor of biases are also
Yeah, it's different.
right? So we'll have to be very, very careful about this. Great, great. Anything that else that you would like to add to this factor, the data?
I think this is an opportunity for, AI is going to become part of our lives, and AI is possibly transformative.
Right.
It's empowering, and it's important that we are able to create these data sets the so that India's citizens are able to use this and are empowered, rather than depending on data sets from, like other countries.
Right. Good. So I think for today's discussion, we can wrap it up, and then we would do maybe one or two more episodes where we could, discuss on the remaining three factors. But it was good. It was good, talking with you today about the data. And this is a constantly changing field. I think if we talk about data and AI in context of India, few weeks down the line, we'll have many more uh, exciting and probably scary points to discuss about. But yeah, it's good. Good. Thanks for your time, Aditya. And I hope
Oh, thank you, Anshul. And it's great catching up with you as always. So talk to you soon. Bye bye.
I see you.